Okay. Good morning, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us this morning. It's a pleasure to have you all here with us, and I hope this will be another insightful and inspiring session. I'd like to say a big thank you to our speakers, Dr. Crystal Water of Agrimondis for joining us today, and to all the participants already logged in. Just before we delve into the crux of the matter for today, I'd like to just give you a brief overview of what we do at the Competence Center, Agribusiness. Thank you, Dr. Ejewere. Now we can see you. It's good to have you. I think your audio is still, all right. Yeah, we can hear you. Very good. So I'll just quickly do a brief introduction, and then we move into a short presentation by Christoph before we go into the panel session. So please wait while I share my screen. Can you all see my screen? Okay. So today we are looking at a very important topic, as many of you are aware, food and nutrition security in Nigeria. And if you're conversant with recent developments within the agri space, you would agree with us that agriculture is not only important for business, but also, more importantly, nutrition is now a bigger part of agriculture, as it were. This series called the Virtual Agri Series is what it's organized by the Competence Center Agribusiness, and we've been doing this since the beginning of the year. It happens once every month, and it's the first Friday of every month. Please let me know if you can see the screen. It's almost like I can't see the screen. Okay, all right. So we have put this together to create an avenue for stakeholders within this sector to not only just network and share best practices and shared experiences, but also to, talk in a very relaxed atmosphere like we have it. It's more or less like a coffee chat site type of event, and we're happy with that format, as it were. Just so I also touch on the next one for October, for August, we'll be looking at data and digital agriculture. That will be another very fantastic session. Just to touch on some of our services within the Delegation of German Industry and Commerce, we are your point of call for entry into the Nigerian market. Primarily, we support trade and export promotion between Nigerian and German businesses, leveraging our extensive network and know-how within the country over the last 4 decades. And I'm happy to also announce that it's our anniversary year, 40th. So it's been a long time coming. These are some of the services that we have in us at the moment. Let me just touch on some of the departments and competence centers that we have. We have one on energy and environment, innovation and startups for those within that industry, for those within the digital industry. And we have our business development competence center. We also have our skills development competence center. So primarily these are the competence centers through which we provide services to our customers and clients. Finally, just so I don't bore you, you can reach out to us. We have 2 offices now, one in Abuja and now also one in Lagos. You're free to walk in anytime, any moment, and feel free to also drop an email with any of your requests. So at this point, I'd like to say a big welcome to you once again. And I would like to ask Christoph to please introduce yourself in just 1 minute. And after you, we'll take a brief introduction from Dr. Ejewere as well.
Fabulous. Thank you very much, Ola. So my name is Christoph Walter. For those who've joined recently, I'm the consultancy director of Agromondus, an agricultural consulting company. We are based with our head office in Lagos and have offices in Europe and Kenya as well. And we've been invited by HK to give a bit of an overview, which I will do in a minute. I'm an agronomist myself, so I'm very, very curious to hear from Dr. Ejewere in a minute to kind of see the other side of the coin, the medical side, which is exciting in this context. And look forward to this webinar and hope it will be very interactive. So please do ask questions and guide us on where and how to focus. Thank you very much, and over to you, Doctor.
Good morning, Dr. Patrick Ejewere. Privileged to serve as a medical doctor who has gone beyond the confines of conventional medical training. Born and raised here in Nigeria, went to the US age 15, my background, chemistry, degree in chemistry, degree in pharmacy before medical degree, internal medicine, Johns Hopkins, then did an MBA. So I approach it from a very analytical perspective. Post-training, a lot of training in nutrition, herbalism, the expanded arena of integrative medicine. When you talk about integrative medicine, you have to look at the entire system, from the root to the table, to the environment, even to the mindset of the individual and the larger community. So I'm delighted to be on this panel today, and hopefully we'll all learn and we'll all share and learn and make the world a place with high levels of food and nutrition security. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was really good. Thank you, Christoph. Thank you, Dr. Ejewere. So without further ado, I'd just like to do a bit of housekeeping. Please, you can leave your questions in the Q&A section. You can also please introduce yourself in the chat area with just your name, company name, and designation. That will be very helpful going forward. So, Christoph, the ball is in your court.
Thank you, Ola. I'll try and share a couple of slides. Of course, we're consultants, so are they visible?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay, let me try this again.
All right. Yes, you can see.
Okay, great. So Ola had asked us, or had asked me to give a little bit of a background, just to set the scene. And I felt that because there's a lot of different concepts and words, some are interchangeable, used, that maybe a bit of a dive into that is helpful at the beginning. And sorry if that's a bit dry. I'm just going to share a very, very rough and superficial overview of the sort of nutrition status in Nigeria in the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, and then touch upon the topic of nutrition-sensitive agriculture, which I think is the really interesting piece here, and really look forward to learning and hearing from Dr. Ejewere on the intersection of this topic with food and nutrition in the wider sense. And also to say that there is, I think Ola might be mentioning that later, there is a training course coming up on nutrition food security where we will go into nutrition sensitive agriculture in some detail in one of the training days. I will just dive right in with the concepts and definitions. So let's start with food security. Food security has been defined about 10, 12 years ago in the UN, United Nations world, as what happens when all people at all times have physical and economic access to sufficient, safe and nutritious food that meets their dietary needs and food preferences for an active and healthy life. That is a fantastic, very comprehensive definition. And there's typically 4 aspects or dimensions of food security that have been derived and are being discussed from this definition. I put them in capitalized letters here. So the stability, so the question of having continued access to food security or to food. There is the access part, which is the ability, there's the availability, let's say this first. And the availability is that there is actually enough food. And the second point is then whether people are actually able to access that food, both in terms of physical access. So, is there enough food in the country? Yes, but can people in the villages get it? No. Or in fact, their economic means of doing so. So can they afford it? And then lastly, and this is the interesting piece where we talk about diets and nutrition really, is that food sufficient and suitable to support an active and healthy life? So that's food security. Let's have a look at 3 other terms: food insecurity, malnutrition, and undernourishment. Food insecurity is basically the opposite of food security. That's pretty easy. So when one of these 4 aspects is absent. Malnutrition is nutrient deficiency or access or imbalance. Excess is becoming an increasing issue in the context of overweight and obesity in many countries, and there's many developing countries where people go literally from one generation to the next from a situation of undernutrition to overweight and obesity. We observe that in many countries in Latin America, for example, but also in India. So anything to do with the imbalance of nutrients, both macro and micronutrients. And then undernourishment is a fancy term for hunger. So you will find many older publications just talk about hunger. It's more modern to speak about undernourishment. The Sustainable Development Goals do that too. So that's essentially hunger. Taking malnutrition and undernourishment together is then, as the last definition on this slide, often referred to as undernutrition. So lots of concepts. I thought I'd just throw them at you to set the scene here. Also important to quickly have a look at those 3 in context. So anyone who is hungry is of course food insecure. Malnutrition is often a result of food security, but not necessarily. There are other factors like diseases that may contribute to malnutrition even in the absence of a food insecure situation, or when people are food secure. So that's why this red circle kind of overlaps a little bit outside the food security circle. Okay. Those 3 concepts are in a relationship, in a kind of a cyclical causal relationship with other important factors. So undernutrition, to just sort of say a single term here that you see on the right hand side here, leads to poor physical and cognitive development of children, as well as adults, and their ability to actually perform to their physical and cognitive potential, which then leads to low productivity, and that leads to poverty, and then poverty again leads to those things. So there's a vicious circle that really forms between these different concepts. They are linked there is a strong link with the Sustainable Development Goals. If you're familiar with them, there's 17 of them, and the first 3 really are going to the core of what we're discussing today. The first one is about no poverty. The second one is about zero hunger, and that's also including sustainable agriculture. And the third one is about health and well-being, again, central to the concepts we're discussing here today. Finally, and this is the last definition or concept I'm going to throw at you, we have the somewhat more modern and more in vogue term of nutrition-sensitive agriculture, often NSA, which tries to encapsulate at least those 3 bottom concepts in this vicious circle, and by extension of the concept is also including poverty or poverty alleviation. And nutrition-sensitive agriculture is our take is that it's the kind of the modern rehash of the food security definition in a slightly extended context. It's seeking to ensure that there is a production of a variety of affordable, nutritious, culturally appropriate and safe foods in adequate quantity and quality to meet the dietary requirements of in a sustainable manner. So this is a slightly more modern definition than the food security one, and that the FAO, for example, likes to use in recent publications and in recent concepts. With that said, I'm going to move on to a quick overview of nutrition status in Nigeria. If anyone feels that there is a burning question, please drop that in the comments to Ola, and Ola, interrupt me. I can't see and monitor the comments as I speak here, so you have to interrupt me if questions come in. Globally, there's 690 million people in the world that are undernourished, so hungry, and 81 million of those people are in Nigeria. So this is this left-hand side bar chart you see here. So this is the total number, and the Nigerian flag down here, so the Nigerian share. And the distribution is, as you see down here, within the population. So globally, about 9% of the global population are hungry. And the share has been increasing in recent years. In sub-Saharan Africa, the share is actually much higher. It's 22%. And then in Nigeria, it's 13% of the total population that are hungry. All of these shares have increased in recent years. Food insecurity, and this is a sum of people who are labeled as moderately and severely food insecure, is a similar picture. There's 2 billion people globally who are food insecure, 25 million of them in Nigeria. And actually, I'm just seeing that some of the numbers there are not quite right. This is actually the other way around. Sorry, it's 81 million of them are in Nigeria, and then 25 million of the undernourished people are in Nigeria. Sorry, these numbers are mixed up. 25 million, 81. Exchange them in your mind. So 2 billion globally, and this share down here, 81 million of them in Nigeria. The share in Nigeria is 41%. The global average is 26%. If we look at some of the indicators that are being tracked in this context in particular, they're about child nutrition. You can see that those indicators have actually declined over time. This is for Nigeria in particular. And you might be able to see a dotted declining line down here that goes from the 2015 figure of 37% and 7.3% respectively down to 0 in 2030. So this is the target, and though these figures are declining, they need to be declining much faster to be on track with the Sustainable Development Goal targets of zero hunger in 2030. Quick definition again, stunting is when children are smaller than expected, and wasting is when children are a lot thinner than expected. If we're looking at overall, the overall population, not just, then actually, as I said before, the situation is actually worsening. Over recent years, undernourishment, so hunger, has increased over the past decade, and the food insecurity is also on a slightly upward trajectory. This only goes until 2018, so we're expecting that if new figures come through, they will actually show another increase on the basis of the COVID consequences of the past few years. There is a north-south gradient with these indicators. This is on the example of child stunting, but other indicators show a similar distribution. On that basis, if there are any burning questions, I'm going to move on to nutrition-sensitive agriculture. Okay. So what is nutrition-sensitive agriculture? I showed you a definition earlier, which doesn't very much highlight why this is a useful concept, though. I think these two charts maybe do. What you can see here is essentially a food balance, or a food basket that we are consuming. On the right-hand side, you see what agriculture is actually producing. So 41% of cereals and starches, 11% of meat and other protein sources, 16% of sugar, 70% of fruit and vegetables, etc. So this is what globally agriculture is producing. And on the left-hand side, you see what globally, again, our diet should be looking like if we were a healthy diet. And the different models of healthy diets, this one is based on the Harvard Healthy Eating Plate model, but they're essentially very, very similar, these different models. And what we can immediately see, that the balance, for example, between fruit and vegetables and cereals is almost inverted compared to what we're producing. We're also seeing that sugars only play a marginal role, whereas they actually are 16% of global production. So we can see immediately that our production, what we produce globally, and what we should be consuming is quite different. A more recent study was launched a couple of years ago by the Eat Lancet Commission that looked at a very similar picture. It looked at what we actually eat and what we should be eating. What they call the planetary or globally healthy diet is what you see on the left-hand side. This plate, again, there's about 50% fruit and veg, and then a much smaller share of different proteins.
Sorry, Christoph. Sorry to interrupt. Just
yes.
3 more minutes.
Thank you, Ola. Yes. So most proteins here are plant-based. And then on the right-hand side, you can see what we're eating. And this is actually the example for sub-Saharan Africa. There's different compositions of this chart. And there's two things that stand out. One is that these different wedges have different sizes. And you can immediately see that certain things like dairy products, like proteins, plant-based proteins, are less than the 100% that are recommended. And then you can see that the tuberous-based starch vegetables are far more. And this healthy diet definition also includes a view on sustainability, not only at human nutrition. This chart I'm just going to leave with you for your own consumption. It's difficult to read, I realize that, but it's quite interesting because it contrasts the Nigerian diet or the Nigerian consumption of certain food groups with a recommended level, which is labeled TMRL here. This is the theoretical minimum risk level. It's in the comments to this chart what this definition actually is, and you can see that the red circles, which is Nigerian actuals, versus this recommended level, is often quite far apart. I'm going to skip this slide here and we'll briefly talk about the different tools that are available for nutrition-sensitive agriculture. There's quite a lot of things that are being discussed in the context of Nigeria. There are, of course, more tools worldwide, but in Nigeria, there is ongoing discussions and projects that are targeting and addressing all of these things. So from reducing post-harvest losses and improving cold chains to addressing aflatoxin and food safety and food security, to fortified foods, biofortified crops, and special food groups like, for example, eggs as a source of protein. I will close without going into this in detail, just saying there is actually a very sound business case for nutrition sensitive agriculture at a macroeconomic level. Investing in nutrition sensitive agriculture improves, essentially costs less in terms of GDP than it produces a couple of years later, and you can show that at various levels. With that, I'm going to close. We're happy to share this presentation after the webinar, and you can look at the detail in your own time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christoph. So at this point, I think it's time we move into the panel discussion. And I'd like to also tell our audience to please leave your questions in the Q&A box, and I will take them as we go along. Do I have Dr. Ejewere there? Okay, yeah, I mean, picking from your slides as well, Christoph, the last slide for me is quite one of the most interesting slides you have there. Of course, when you look at the business case, that's what most of our audience are looking for, you know. So I would like you to maybe, since you didn't have time to cover that, briefly talk about the mediums for, you know, investment within that space. What are the business cases you can talk of, you know, just briefly?
Yes, very happy to, and I would like to invite Dr. Ejewere to comment on that very same topic, maybe in a minute, and maybe from a more competent position actually than me, because essentially there is research now that shows that the damage of malnutrition economies is very heavy and on multiple levels. It's about health, it's about reduced life expectancy of people, and of course it is a socioeconomic damage around the reduced mental and human capital that a society is able to provide through its children and their education. So those costs are there and have been quantified. One study puts them at about $500 per person on the face of the globe every year, which is an enormous cost. And there are also studies that look at the cost of alleviating them to certain economies, and typically they would lie between 1% and 4% of the GDP for an individual year, whereas the gains could be something like 4 to 8% perpetually every year after a certain number of years when these measures take effect. So there is certainly a business case from a macroeconomic perspective. That said, there will be lots of niches and spaces where individual businesses can step in. There's a lot of donor attention on this topic at the moment. We're aware of a number of projects that are going on, and we can share a list of those later on if there was any interest, as well as just utilizing underutilized potential. For example, in Nigeria, an estimated 5% of value in agribusiness is actually produced by smallholder farmers, whereas we all know that smallholder farmers make up well over 95% of the farming population in Nigeria, and produce probably about 60 or 70% of all food in Nigeria. So the amount or the discrepancy between the value they add in the food system and what they could be doing is enormous. And I think that in itself presents multiple opportunities.
Yeah. Thank you. I've been corroborating that fact. According to the Power of Nutrition, it's a global network that focuses on nutrition, and it was said that investing in nutrition is now one of the most cost-effective drivers for development and rural prosperity, especially when you talk about the proportion of rural, smallholders within this space. I think it's important to look into that further on. I'd like to just also switch to Dr. Ejewere. One very interesting thing about this practice at the moment is what he calls the nutrition and wellness model and he uses this model, according to him, to treat some of the chronic diseases we have around, like cancer, even kidney problems, and diabetes. So I'd like you, Dr. Ejewere, to please give a brief, very briefly, what you mean, what the term nutrition and wellness model is, and its application in your service delivery as a practitioner.
Thank you, Ola and Christoph. Delighted to be on this panel. Let me start with a real experience when I returned to Nigeria in 2008. I was appointed medical director for a new HMO. The HMO was owned by the Catholic Church. The church owns over 300 hospitals and clinics throughout the country. Part of my responsibility as medical director was to travel to all these locations, give seminars to the doctors, the nurses, administrators, to understand the approach from a nutritional wellness perspective, for the administrators to understand cash-based to insurance and HMO-based kind of medical modeling. In this journey, for which I did about 2 years, I would travel to parts of the country from Owo, Iwo, down to Port Harcourt, Bomadi, Ahiara, Olu, Newi, throughout the country. And I would usually stay at a facility owned by the church, i.e. a convent or a seminary or monastery. And I get to eat and dine with these clergy folks, or soon-to-be clergy folks, for 2, and sometimes 3, 4 days, or even a week. And you watch how they walk into the refectory, the dining hall. You watch them around the campuses. You see what they're eating, and instantly there's a correlation. Some of the convents, for instance, you find women in their 40s and early 50s showing signs of arthritis, osteoarthritis. Many are already diabetic and have high blood pressure. Like, wow, that's interesting. I mean, you see a case of obesity. Then when you join them in the dining hall, for breakfast, many are having bread, maybe bread and egg, or bread and sardine. Butter is usually there also. They have tea, or they have a cocoa-based beverage. I wouldn't name any of the brands, but you know them. For lunch, they would have semovita, semolina, or wheat meal. And then for supper, they would have noodles, or they'll have one of the spaghetti brands, and the like. Of course, there may be some sauce there, or some chicken, and I began connecting the dots. And some of the cases, in the morning they had wheat, which was made into bread. Afternoon they had semolina, which is made from wheat. In the evening they had noodles or spaghetti made from what? The same thing. Many were truly malnourished. And many of their ailments were stemmed from this poverty in the diversity of the nutrition that they were consuming. You ask, okay, how did this show up? Many of us are partly responsible, we in the health arena, because we're promoting these as healthy options compared to what they would have consumed more traditionally. So when we talk about opportunities in these mediums for investment, we start with proper education. Folks need to understand what they're eating. Macronutrients, micronutrients, the variety. There's a lot of misleading marketing today that pushes certain, convenience foods. And this is what. So opportunities are there to educate the folks properly on what is true nutrition. Even what is real food. Is food what comes from the earth, or is food what comes from the factory? Nutrition, how the food affects the body. There's also room to invest in the value chain. A lot of communities produce abundance, and I saw this firsthand. You go to parts of Benue State outside Makoti, you see abundance of mangoes. My goodness, plantain, abundant. The issue is not availability. It's abundant, it's there. But the roads to get to those places are atrocious, sad, pressing. So when we talk about malnutrition, who really has the malnutrition? Is it those in the villages who are still consuming the traditional diet and the variety they have, or those in the urban or suburban areas who are now consuming a lot of the highly processed foods and are not getting access to the foods from the bounty from the rural countryside? So investing in proper transportation is important, whether it's proper roads. Actually, I prefer railroad. They are just a lot more reliable and more durable. So knowledge, access, transportation. The other factor in malnutrition is the economic modeling that we use. You cannot put a child to compete with an adult. Many of the folks who grow these crops in the villages don't understand the economic modeling that we use today in the big cities. But that's from financing to the buying and selling concept, or the scarcity model, which we tend to exist with, where folks buy it and hoard it till prices go up. So there needs to be a bit of economic modeling understanding at the production level, at the cultivation level, so that middlemen, who are usually very important, are allowing fair who are in the city where you have more of malnutrition. So yes, there's opportunities in several aspects: knowledge, even cultivation, what we call cluster formation, purchasing in bulk from these rural farmers, guaranteeing them a fair price. There's opportunity then in transportation to the cities. Of course, it's a bit difficult with the sad roads. So investment in transportation sector, especially in the railroad arena, there's a lot of opportunity in investing. Of course, I haven't even touched on the other parts of the value chain, where you may convert the mangoes, into mango juice, or what do you call it, from frozen mango, and export and things like that. So let me pause here. I can touch on another area. Let me pause here, and I'll come later when I ask another question. I'll touch on the medical component, the wellness aspect a bit more.
All right, thank you very much. That was actually very detailed. To Christoph, in one of your slides, you mentioned that there is a mismatch between a healthy diet and what we are actually producing. You've been an agronomist. Can you sort of look into our food production at the moment in Nigeria and maybe tell us how we could bring about biodiversity to ensure that we can achieve food security and improve nutrition? How do we go about ensuring biodiversity in this, especially within the food production value chain?
Thank you, Ola. I feel I can give a very personal and maybe more philosophical answer to that than a scientifically founded one.
Best.
I think what we look at is, I mean, we got what we asked for with our food system globally and in Nigeria, and I think rightly and understandably so. So if we look at what's happened since the 1950s, 1960s, we had green revolutions in all sorts of parts of the world, and their primary focus has been to increase the yield and availability of main staple foods, and in the face of widespread hunger, I think that's also the right, that's the right focus. But of course, that development continues today, and it continues with a pretty single-minded focus on increasing yield and productivity of certain key crops. And there's a reduction in the portfolio of these key crops we're seeing. If I look at Nigeria, sort of more traditional grains, for example, would be less cultivated, things like finger millet, things that maybe not as easy to harvest, maybe not quite as high yielding as other crops, and maybe not quite as convenient. So white rice is not particularly nutritious, but it's a very convenient food. It's easy to prepare, it's easy to store, and we can see that it's spreading. So the kind of the population and civilization drivers, as well as the enablers in agricultural research, have certainly led us to where we are. And I think agricultural research has done a good job, given what we asked from it. That question that we asked from it is now and should now be changing, because we do realize that the nutrient density of some of these foods, our diets, is actually suffering, as well as the fact that these diets and the portfolio of foods we're producing may not be within the sustainable planetary boundaries, and therefore we have to reconsider and go back to some of these basic concepts and replan. And so my very personal view on this is that diversity helps with a healthy diet. Diversity certainly helps with future-proofing and making more resilient our agricultural production systems, because the impoverishment of genetic resources that we have, both in terms of the number of crops that we focus on, as well as the diversity within each of these crops, is ever decreasing, and we face an ever more challenging natural environment to produce these crops. So we need that diversity, both in terms of the choice of different crops we have, but also the choice of varieties and genetic strands within each of these, which may mean that in the short term we would have to compromise on yield in some of these cases, in favor of resilience, and maybe in favor of nutritional quality, but also maybe in the context of more clever production systems. A lot of our modern production systems are essentially monocultures in relatively simple crop rotations, sometimes just a two crop rotation. And again, those systems over the long term tend to impoverish the natural ecosystems that produce them. And if we introduce more diversity there, we introduce resilience. And that's something that's I think encapsulated in the regenerative agriculture debate, which is hot at the moment. And so I think there's an underlying root cause for many of these issues, but there may also be an underlying solution that solves many of these things at the same time if we bring diversity in our systems thinking.
Thank you very much. You actually touched on some of the some very key points there, especially when you talk about resilience. And I think it's very much relevant at this point in time, especially with climate change and some of the insecurity issues we have at the moment. So we need to make sure that the food system is actually not only sustainable, but also resilient. So I think on that, I will come back to you on that shortly. I'll go to Dr. Ijewere. You know, while you were speaking, you talked about micronutrient deficiency. And I think it's one key area where we also have to give it to the government for what they've been doing since, I think, 2002 around food fortification, if I remember correctly. So especially within mass fortification for flours, meat, wheat flours, and also I think there's vitamin A fortified cooking oil and iodized salt. So I want you to please briefly touch on, micronutrient deficiencies and how this and their correlation, especially with staples and condiments. You know, I think these are the areas where while talking also, you talked a lot about what people consume on a daily basis. And I remember what I had last night. You just pricks me there. So we do more of, staples, carbs, and the likes. Can you talk a little bit more about micronutrient deficiencies and how both government and the private sector can actually leverage food fortification to address that issue?
This is an excellent follow-up question to what you asked a couple of moments ago. And if I just take that same slide you mentioned earlier that showed what we actually need and what we're actually consuming, the overconsumption of the cereal and the processed grains and the starches versus the half plates that should be of fruits and vegetables. Where are the micronutrients? They are abundant in the fruits and vegetables. That's half side of the plate. That is where the micronutrients are abundant. Thank you to Christoph. That's where they're abundant. The plate on the left-hand side, the green background there, that's where the micronutrients are abundant. I see what looks like carrots. That's vitamin A for us. I see what looks like maybe it's beetroot or tomatoes. Tomatoes, lycopene, beetroot, vitamin B12, iron. I see what looks like mushrooms there. Those are massive immune boosters. That's where the micronutrients are. But we're consuming the model that gives us the so-called staples, the rice, the white rice, which is nutrient deficient. The wheat, which is nutrient, absent. Touching on what Christoph talked about, the agricultural model, the monoculture model that we use today, just depletes the soil. So if the soil is deficient in micronutrients, of course, the plants that grow in that same soil are deficient in micronutrients. And the humans and even the animals that consume such plant products are likewise deficient. And this ties into a lot of the chronic diseases that we see today, the so-called degenerative or inflammatory disorders that we see. They are tied to severe chronic deficiencies in a number of cases. So if you're asking, how do we solve this? Where are the opportunities, where can government step in? In the wellness model, we say, treat the cause, go to the underlying cause. If you can treat the cause, you can halt the disease progression or even reverse the disease. The disease now is a society that is loaded with micronutrient deficiencies, magnesium, zinc, vanadium, even calcium. I mean, today, vitamin D, that's abundant through sunlight. We're indoors today. I mean, you're not, see, I'm outdoors deliberately. I love the outdoors. This is, we're created as outdoor beings. But many of my colleagues and my clients who come in today are vitamin D deficient. How come? So in the wellness model, we say, treat the cause, reverse the disease. So what's the cause of the micronutrient deficiency? It's the slide that Christoph just showed us. We've abandoned the source of micronutrients to consume the convenient, maybe inexpensive staples. So the first approach is create a business model that allows people to invest in that arena. The biodiversity, the carrots, the beetroots, the tomatoes, the mushrooms. It's not new. Our grandparents knew this. I've talked to old folks, in the East and the West, and they tell you, during mushroom season, they went into the bush and collected baskets full of mushrooms. Today, the young professionals think mushrooms is an exotic food, have no connection with mushrooms. So if you want to address the problem and look at the opportunities, let's address the cause initially. Let's invest in that area of agriculture. Let's invest in creating the awareness. When you maximize that arena, it's okay. People are still eating, maybe they've dropped from 47, 41% cereal, and they're now doing 20% cereal. Now let's maybe fortify that cereal. The way the cereals are produced, a lot of the nutrients are lost in the production, in the processing. Yes, that 20%, fine, fortify it as a secondary measure, not as a primary measure, as a secondary measure to assist in the micronutrient replacement. Now, in that fortification, what are you going to use in the fortification? Create another opportunity. Are you going to use synthetic materials or natural-based materials? For instance, in our practice, we use dried mushrooms to fortify our clients' cereal, their children's cereal at home. We use dried moringa. We ask them to sprinkle it on their beans, on their rice, even in their porridge. So there lies open the opportunities with fortification. Let's again target natural sources to fortify the foods. In doing so, you're putting money into the communities that produce those foods. The moringa farmer, for instance, the mushroom farmer. You're putting wealth back into the rural areas where the food is produced. So in the entire chain, yes, there's opportunities for micronutrient replenishment from the farmer who produces the carrots, the beetroots, and the tomatoes, increasing the plate to 50% of that sort of naturally biodiverse foods, and then reducing the cereal from 41% to 20%. That 20% you now fortify with items, preferably, again, more natural fortification items, and then as a tertiary step, we use the synthetic fortification items. Why is that important? Because the body absorbs natural nutrients very easily. In 2 weeks, we can halt anemia and even reverse it. In weeks, we can halt chronic diseases with a lot of natural-based products. We don't get the result as quickly with, let's say, a synthetic iron supplement versus the natural plant-based high iron, high chlorophyll supplements. So in the dialogue of fortification and business opportunities, we also want to address what gives you the best or the maximum medical wellness impact. What will address that? Malnutrition massively. If I may just give a quick example, I've had old women at seminars tell me that during the Civil War, what saved them in the woods was moringa. They ate it abundantly. Some said it was the mushrooms. And today, in parts of that part of the country, it's called poor man's food. I just shook my head. Scientific analysis has shown that moringa is a natural multivitamin, multi-supplement. There are other crops, I'm just picking using moringa. And so we've had examples where it's important to fortify, it's important to enrich the foods, and there's business opportunities. I hope I've kind of shared the three-pronged approach to this.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, from your submission on this, I think this will take me back to Christoph about, if we look at the food processing segment of the value chain at the moment, we have quite a lot of post-harvest losses, considering that not so much of this farm produce actually reach the end consumers. From your experience working with farmers over time, where do you see improvement in this in that segment, as it were? Like Dr. Ijewere rightly said, if you look at tomatoes, the shelf life is not, you know, the same as if you're producing cassava. And I think some of these things also affect how smallholder farmers also pick what crop they produce per time. So where are the opportunities for improvement within that space from your experience?
Thank you, Ola. Yeah, I would like to go back to something that Dr. Ijewere actually mentioned earlier, which was the transport infrastructure, roads and rail, to actually distribute produce across the country.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this is a factor that's very often forgotten, and that would not only benefit agriculture and food and nutrition, but the economy as a whole. And we, interestingly, we ran an agribusiness leadership survey recently, where we asked participating agribusinesses, what are the policy areas or what policy interventions would help the agribusiness sector most? And the one that came out clearly as the top one, with something like 81% agreement, was to improve road and rail links. So, you know, this is I think we often sort of cope with what's there, but it makes us forget that that's one of the underlying structural issues that Nigeria struggles with. And when you go to other countries that do have these existing rail links and networks, use, for example, Thailand as an example, which has had a fairly recent agricultural boom. Thailand has a fantastic road network, and you can, despite the size of the country, travel from the south to the north on a very, very convenient road without any blockages, without any potholes, in hours, and that of course makes things a lot easier. So I think the infrastructure component is one that is really important, and maybe not one that people think of in the first place, but precisely because of that, I think it's important to keep bringing attention back to that. Yeah, I think in view of time, I'm going to limit it to this one point, maybe.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to also crave your indulgence, our participant, to give us a little bit of 5 more minutes to answer 1 or 2 more questions. I can see one question I can see a few questions in the Q&A box, and I think by 11:10 we would be out of here. Since you've also touched on regulation, I mean, and policies and plans and action plans, just of recent, the Federal Executive Council, and in collaboration also with the Governors Forum, approved the National Multi-Sectoral Plan of Action for Food and Nutrition 2021 to 2025. And the targets are to reduce malnutrition by 50%, increase exclusive breastfeeding to 65%, and reduce stunting for underage children to 18% by 2025. So, Dr. Ijewere, in light of these several policies and action plans, how have we fared in the last, say, 10 years? I mean, we have loads of policies, regulations, action papers, and policy objectives. What is, as a practitioner within the nutrition space, what has your experience been so far?
Let me, my late father would say, Nigeria continues to thrive in spite of the government. Nigeria continues to thrive in spite of the government. That tells you, I grew up in a household where private initiative was the order. Don't wait for the government to get it done. And there are folks in my state, if they were allowed to get into building railroads to carry produce from the farms to a central station or to Lagos directly, they will do it. They will do it. But railroad is tied in as a federal, what do you call it, one of those sacred federal areas only. If you let them, dredge the River Niger and put the produce on ships to Lagos, they would do it. Before the Kanji Dam was built, ships used to come up the Niger as far as Lokoja and load farm produce and bring it into Lagos. That's how my grandfather came to Lagos on a ship from around that Lokoja area. Okay, so you can, waiting for the government, good luck to us. Now, government just creates the enabling environment. If they don't create it, we'll still do our best in the private sector. Well, I remember sometime in the 1970s, there was this big government policy called Operation Feed the Nation, OFN. That if by 2020, with the starvation, too many population, not enough food, government put all this big money out. Hello, where are the industrial farms that they claim they will set up? Thousands of them. Where are the tractors today? Where is STERY, the company that was built, I think was here in the West, to bring in the tractors so farmers had access to cheap tractors. In the 1980s, we had the Green Revolution under, OFN was under Obasanjo. Green Revolution was under Babangida. Again, they give us scary statistics about 2050, 20 whatever, starvation, too much population. Let's put up, money came in from all kinds of sources. What's the end result? When my father decided to go into mass agriculture, 1980-81, under the Shagari administration, they made it very clear that the tractors and the combined harvesters sitting down idle at the various rural federal government offices should be leased at little to no kobo to farmers who wanted it. Let the farmers take it, repair it, and let them use it. That's how my family got involved in large-scale corn and rice production, using a combined harvester that you couldn't match with a hoe and cutlass farming. So when policies are sincere, down to the level where it matters, the rural level, even those of us who have degrees in banking and what do you call it, finance, whatever, would see the opportunity, business-wise, to go down there and start that scale farming. By the time Babangida came in, the policies, Buhari came in, the policies that Shagari had created that allowed my father to use the combined harvester that had been idle and getting rusting for how many years was scrapped. The farm that employed over 200 folks in the village and was supplying many of the big breweries corn and supplying farm markets with rice and supplying palm oil, fresh palm oil to different middlemen and middle women, mostly middle women doing the palm oil. Suffered a huge hit because to buy one tire for the combined harvester was millions of naira. So government policies, Ola, good luck to you. If they're sincere, that the policies will come right down to the rural area, implemented. Those of us with degrees will go there and put our feet into the soil, as my father did.
Thank you. I mean, there might be issues at the moment, but we can't shy away from, government policies and, the action plans. I would even say the more room we make for collaboration with, policymakers, the better for even the private sector. Whatever they do affect us in one way or the other, so we can't actually shy away from that. My last question will be around capacity building from both your ends as an agronomist, talking about extension services and some of the players who play there. What do you think in terms of capacity is lacking, especially if you look at the involvement of women within food production as well, has access to market information and some of those things that could also improve their own income, improve what they do on the grassroots level. And to you, Dr. Ejewere, for nurses who maybe who I can call the first responder in this case, nurses, doctors, and nutritionists who provide the very first basic services to mothers and children at that very age where nutrition is key. Where do you see a lack of capacity, and in what area should we be looking for improvement? So let's go with you, and then we'll wrap up with Christoph in 1 minute.
All right, 1 minute. Capacity building, essential. Bring right down to the educational structures in schools and medical schools. Right now, nutrition is given a back seat, except in midwifery school. And when we talk about nutrition, you must connect it right down to the farming techniques, the processing techniques, to make sure that the foods are still loaded with the micronutrients that they have originally. Education is extremely important. Capacity building, make sure that nutrients are seen as an integral part of the medical milieu. Education, education, education into the current structure, and if need be, use structures like we have to train doctors and nurses into the importance of nutrition in the wellness model of healthcare.
Thank you. Christoph.
Yeah, I think that this is a topic for potentially another call in itself. But knowledge is an input to agriculture. Knowledge is an input like fertilizer and water and seeds to agriculture. And I think it's often underappreciated, and there's a lot of focus on these physical inputs and very little focus on these knowledge inputs. We have some great potential. Again, there is a big farming population. We have an existing network of institutions out there in the LGAs that could bring that knowledge, if they were then trained themselves properly, to farmers in many cases. And in many cases, actually, they do. And so I think there is a lot of potential there. The one key consideration, I think, is here, if we're looking at an overall professionalization of farming, that's not only to do with knowledge and training and capacity building, but also with farms that are structured and sized in a way that they can actually sustain a family, and they need a conscious decision of the farming family that farming is going to be one of their main income source, that they're going to go professional farmers. And so far, I think we're caught in a situation where too many farmers farm because that's the only livelihood they have. But if they had a choice, they would gladly do something else, and they might in fact be doing something else along the side. And farming is just one of the several strategies they're running, and doesn't receive the attention and the professionalization it actually needs to be done in a way that actually gives them an income and provides food and nutrients for the nation.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been an interesting time together, everyone. And I mean, just as a, yes, please.
Permission, just 1 minute. I need to just address a call with one of the nurses. Just give me 1 minute to go off camera and voice to
That's fine. That's fine, please. Thank you. I mean, we've come to the end of the session today. I just want to give a closing remark. I think, and also reports have shown that commitments and efforts really to make agriculture and food security policies and programs nutrition sensitive are growing, and you see a lot of even development partners now making nutrition sensitive agriculture and food system if one of the core feature of their support to agricultural investment. So I think it's a move in the right direction, and we hope to see more of this happening soon, and of course also providing some sort of tangible results as we hope for. So finally, again, our next session is coming up in August, which is the first Wednesday in August 4th. Please feel free to also join and share the news with your colleagues. For the next session, we'll be looking at digital and data and digital agriculture. That's another big topic. and we hope that you will be part of that session. Lastly, May, if you could please play I'd like to also take this opportunity to invite you to our night's German-Nigerian Business Forum. It's going to be a big one, and we're hoping to also to have you join if you can. Thank you, everyone, once again for joining. Thank you, Christoph. Thank you, Dr. Ejewore, for your insightful contributions and submissions. They've been very, very enlightening. So on this note, May, if you are still there, please just share the GMBF video and then we'll wrap up.
Okay, I will.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tech. Okay, so I think that didn't happen, so we can call it a day. Thank you very much once again, and I wish you all a good afternoon ahead. Thank you. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ola, for your moderation, everyone's great participation. Thank you. Bye-bye.
For the slides,
Bye.
much appreciated.